The Man Who Died Twice, a Miss Marple mystery. Hi there, welcome back to Haunting Vales. Tonight's mystery begins with a man who was supposedly dead until someone claims to have seen him alive again. Miss Marple soon discovers that his second death may be the clue to a secret someone has desperately tried to hide. Before we uncover the truth behind The Man Who Died Twice, don't forget to subscribe for more haunting Miss Marple mysteries on Haunting Vales.
Chapter 1: The Man Who Died Twice. Rain had been falling over St. Mary Mead since breakfast. By 4 in the afternoon, the village lanes were black and shining, the hedges dripping steadily, and the gardens had taken on that damp, miserable look which made even the roses seem offended. Miss Marple sat beside the window of her cottage, knitting quietly, while the kettle muttered on the hob. She had just reached a particularly troublesome row when the telephone rang. It was Inspector Harris. His voice sounded tired, and Miss Marple had learned long ago that policemen rarely sounded tired for ordinary reasons. "Miss Marple, I wonder if you could come to Bellamy House. There's been a death." Miss Marple stopped knitting. "Oh dear. Who has died?" "Mr. Arthur Bellamy. Retired solicitor. 72. Found in his study this afternoon by his housekeeper. The doctor believes it was natural causes." "Believes?" There was a pause. "That's the trouble. A neighbor claims she saw Mr. Bellamy alive this morning." Miss Marple looked through the window at the rain. "Then I think I'd better come." Bellamy House stood at the end of a long gravel drive, behind a row of old beech trees. It was a large, square house with tall windows and dark stone walls. The sort of house that looked respectable even when something unpleasant had happened inside it. Inspector Harris was waiting at the front door when Miss Marple arrived. He took her umbrella and lowered his voice. "The body is in the study. Nothing has been disturbed." "And the neighbor?" "Mrs. Clara Finch. She lives across the lane. She says she saw Mr. Bellamy standing at an upstairs window at 8:15 this morning." "Did she see his face?" "No." Miss Marple raised her eyebrows. "She saw the back of his head," Harris added. "Ah," said Miss Marple. "That is rather different." They entered the study. Arthur Bellamy was sitting in a leather chair beside the cold fireplace. A newspaper lay across his knees. One hand rested loosely against the arm of the chair. On the desk stood a glass of water, a brass clock, and a small silver box. There was nothing obviously wrong with the room. No broken furniture. No overturned chair. No sign of a struggle. Just a dead man sitting quietly in a room that suddenly felt much too quiet. Miss Marple approached the body, but she didn't touch it. She simply studied the man's face. Then she looked around the room. "How long has he been dead?" "The doctor says sometime between 10 last night and midnight." Miss Marple nodded. Her eyes moved to the mantelpiece. 3 photographs stood there. One showed Arthur Bellamy as a young man. Another showed his late wife. The third showed Bellamy himself, taken only a few months earlier. Miss Marple leaned closer to the third photograph. "Inspector." "Yes?" "When was this taken?" March, I believe. Mr. Bellamy had a moustache. Harris glanced at the photograph. Yes. Miss Marple looked at the dead man again. Arthur Bellamy had no moustache. He shaved it off, Harris said. Perhaps. The inspector looked at her. You don't believe that. I believe many things, Inspector. Usually after I've seen them. She turned toward the window. The curtains were half open. Beyond the glass, the garden was wet and grey. A few muddy marks showed beneath the window, but the rain had blurred them badly. Was this window open? No. Locked from the inside. Miss Marple nodded and returned to the desk. She examined the brass clock without touching it. It stopped at 11:20. Yes. And the doctor believes Mr. Bellamy died after 10. Yes. Then that seems quite convenient. Harris gave her a tired look. Convenient. For someone. The inspector sighed. Miss Marple, we don't even know that this was murder. No. We don't. She glanced once more at the dead man. But we know something rather curious. Mrs. Finch says she saw Arthur Bellamy alive at 8:15 this morning. The doctor says he died last night. The body has no moustache. The photograph shows one. And the clock stopped at 11:20. Harris folded his arms. You're suggesting someone dressed up as Bellamy. I haven't suggested anything yet. You're thinking it. Oh, certainly. Miss Marple walked toward the fireplace. A small brass poker rested beside it. There was a faint smear of mud near the hearth, almost invisible against the dark carpet. She bent slightly to examine it. Inspector, has anyone entered this room since the body was found? Only the doctor, myself, and the housekeeper. Then someone entered before the body was discovered. Harris looked down. The muddy mark was shaped like the edge of a shoe. Miss Marple straightened slowly. And there is something else. What? The rain began at 10:30 last night. Harris stared at her. Yes. Miss Marple looked toward the dead man's shoes. They're perfectly clean. Chapter 2: The Man in the Brown Suit. By 8 o'clock the following morning, Bellamy House had become a place of whispers. The rain had stopped during the night, but water still dripped from the branches of the old beech trees, and a thin mist lay across the garden. Inspector Harris had spent most of the night going through Arthur Bellamy's papers. There was very little to show for it. No threatening letters. No serious debts. No obvious enemies. Arthur had been a retired solicitor who lived quietly, paid his bills, attended church on Sundays, and complained about the price of coal with great consistency. He was, in short, an exceedingly ordinary man. Miss Marple had never found ordinary people particularly reassuring. The quieter a life appeared from the outside, the more carefully she tended to look behind the curtains. Miss Marple arrived shortly after breakfast, carrying her knitting bag beneath one arm. Inspector Harris met her in the hall and lowered his voice. The doctor has finished his examination. He still can't give us a definite cause of death. There's no obvious injury, but he agrees the body may have been moved. Miss Marple removed her gloves. That's helpful. Harris gave her a doubtful look. Helpful? Yes. Yesterday we had a dead man sitting in a chair. Today we have a dead man who may not have died in that chair. It's progress. I suppose it is. They entered the study. The leather chair stood empty beside the fireplace. Without the body, the room looked almost respectable again. Miss Marple went straight to the desk and examined the objects left behind. The glass of water was still there. The brass clock still showed 11:20. The newspaper was still folded on the desk. She picked it up. Was this found on Mr. Bellamy's lap? Yes. Had he been reading it? We don't know. Miss Marple opened the paper. A small article on the third page had been marked with pencil. It concerned a property dispute involving a solicitor in London. She turned another page. There was a second mark beside a short notice about a man named George Bellamy, recently returned to England after many years abroad. Miss Marple stopped. George Bellamy. Harris looked over her shoulder. Arthur's brother. I know. He returned 3 weeks ago. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't think it mattered. Miss Marple folded the newspaper carefully. That's the difficulty with murder, Inspector. The details that seem unimportant at 9 o'clock in the morning have an annoying habit of becoming very important by noon. Harris sighed. Arthur and George hadn't spoken for years. Why? Money. There was some disagreement over their father's estate. Did George visit Arthur? Not officially. Miss Marple glanced at him. Not officially. Harris looked uncomfortable. A neighbor saw a man near the house a few days ago. We haven't confirmed who it was. Miss Marple nodded slowly. Then perhaps we should ask someone who knows the house better than we do. At that moment, Mrs. Potter entered carrying a tray of tea. She placed it on the table and looked toward the empty chair. Her face softened. Poor Mr. Bellamy. Miss Marple turned to her. Mrs. Potter, you said yesterday that Mr. Bellamy had a visitor 3 nights ago. Yes. Tell me about him. The housekeeper hesitated. He came after dark. Tall man. Dark coat. Hat pulled down. I couldn't see his face. Did Mr. Bellamy know him? Oh, yes. How do you know? They argued. Harris immediately opened his notebook. What did they argue about? Money. Anything else? Mrs. Potter looked toward the study door. Mr. Bellamy said something strange. What? He said, you should have stayed away. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. And what did the visitors say? I couldn't hear all of it. Something about what belonged to him. Then what happened? Mr. Bellamy told me to go upstairs. Did you? Yes. And when you came down? The man had gone. Through the front door. Mrs. Potter shook her head. He left through the garden. Harris looked up sharply. Did you see his shoes? Mrs. Potter frowned. His shoes? Yes. She thought for a moment. Brown shoes. Very muddy. Miss Marple exchanged a glance with Harris. Thank you, Mrs. Potter. The housekeeper left. Harris closed his notebook. That visitor sounds promising. He sounds important. You don't think he killed Bellamy? I think we should be careful. Why? Because he may have been the man who threatened Bellamy. He may have been a witness. He may even have been the victim. Harris stared at her. The victim. Miss Marple looked toward the empty chair. Inspector, we still haven't proved that the dead man is Arthur Bellamy. Harris said nothing. Miss Marple went upstairs. Arthur Bellamy's bedroom was neat, almost painfully so. His spectacles rested beside the bed. His shaving brush stood beside the wash basin. His wallet and watch lay on the dressing table. Miss Marple opened the wardrobe and began examining the suits one by one. Then she stopped. One hanger was empty. Brown suit, she said. Harris looked at the gap. Could have been at the cleaners. Perhaps. Then why does that matter? Because Mrs. Potter says Mr. Bellamy wore it 2 days ago. Harris frowned. Miss Marple continued searching the wardrobe. And because Mrs. Finch saw a man standing at this window yesterday morning. The man in the brown suit. Yes. Harris looked toward the window. From there, Mrs. Finch's house could be seen clearly across the lane. She couldn't see his face. No. So anyone could have stood here wearing Bellamy's clothes. Exactly. Harris slowly understood. The murderer needed someone to see him. Miss Marple nodded. Not the murderer, perhaps. Someone who looked enough like Arthur Bellamy from a distance. She moved to the dressing table and picked up the dead man's watch. This was here when we arrived. Yes. And he wasn't wearing it. No. Arthur Bellamy never left the house without this watch. How do you know? Mrs. Potter told me. He wound it every morning at 7. Miss Marple placed the watch back in its exact position. So the man at the window wasn't wearing it. Harris stared at her. Then he wasn't Bellamy. No. And whoever he was, he wanted Mrs. Finch to believe that Bellamy was alive. Miss Marple looked out at the wet garden. Now we're getting somewhere. They returned downstairs. Harris was silent for several moments before speaking. If Bellamy was already dead, why bother pretending he was alive? Miss Marple stopped beside the staircase. To move the time of death. Harris's face hardened. If people believe he was alive at 8:15 yesterday morning, then the doctor has to place the death after that time. Exactly. So the killer could have killed him earlier. Or he could have died naturally earlier. The point is that someone wanted us to believe he was alive. Harris looked troubled. And that means the whole scene was arranged. Yes. They went outside to the garden shed. The door was slightly open. Harris pushed it wider. Inside, beneath an old canvas cover, lay a brown suit. Miss Marple stepped closer. That's Bellamy's, Harris said. Are you certain? Mrs. Potter identified it. Harris picked up the jacket. A small brass key fell from the pocket and landed on the floor. The study key. Miss Marple looked at it. Interesting. Harris searched the remaining pockets. There was a handkerchief, some loose change, and a railway ticket dated 2 days earlier. London, he said. Miss Marple took the ticket. Arthur Bellamy was supposed to travel to London that morning. He never went. No. She looked down at the trousers. There were muddy marks around the cuffs. Harris noticed them too. He walked through the garden. Miss Marple shook her head. No. Why not? Because the mud is only on the trousers. Harris looked at the shoes lying beneath the suit. They were clean. Miss Marple pointed toward them. If someone had walked through the wet garden wearing those clothes, the shoes would be muddy as well. Harris stared at her. Then the mud was put there. Yes. To make us think someone left through the garden. Yes. Miss Marple looked around the shed. Someone wanted us to find this. Harris frowned. Why? Because a false clue is still a clue. He looked at her. And what does this one tell us? Miss Marple was about to answer when the sound of a car came from the drive. A moment later, Richard Bellamy entered the house. He was Arthur's nephew. He was in his early 40s, thin, pale, and rather too carefully dressed for such an unpleasant morning. His eyes moved quickly around the hall before settling on Miss Marple. Inspector. Richard. I've come because there's something I should have told you. Miss Marple watched him closely. What is it? Richard swallowed. I saw someone leaving this house on the night my uncle died. Harris stepped forward. When? Just before midnight. Who was it? I couldn't see his face. What did you see? Richard hesitated. The coat. And? The shoes. Miss Marple said nothing. Harris's voice became sharper. What sort of shoes? Richard looked directly at Miss Marple. Brown shoes. The room fell silent. Miss Marple's expression didn't change. But she was thinking about the muddy shoes in the garden shed. And the railway ticket. And the empty hangar upstairs. And, most of all, about the dead man who might not have been Arthur Bellamy at all.
Chapter 3. The Second Death. Richard Bellamy's confession changed everything. The man seen near the study window had not been Arthur at all. It had been George Bellamy, Arthur's brother. The scar on the dead man's left wrist matched an old family photograph, and Miss Marple knew then that the body in the leather chair had been wrongly identified from the beginning. Richard finally told them what had happened. George had returned to England demanding money from Arthur. The two brothers argued in the study, and the quarrel became violent. Arthur pushed him away. George stumbled, struck his head against the stone fireplace, and died. Arthur panicked. Instead of calling the police, he dressed George in his own clothes and placed him in the study chair. Then came the foolish part. Arthur wanted everyone to believe he was still alive. He wore his brown suit and appeared at the upstairs window so Mrs. Finch could see him. He planted muddy shoes in the garden to create a false trail. He even left his watch on the dressing table, forgetting that he wore it every morning. Miss Marple looked at Richard. Your uncle thought nobody would notice the little things. Inspector Harris gave a tired smile. "And you noticed all of them." "Not all," Miss Marple replied. "Mrs. Potter noticed the shoes, Mrs. Finch noticed the figure at the window, Dr. Ellison noticed the scar. I merely put the pieces together." A floorboard creaked upstairs. Everyone turned. Arthur Bellamy stood at the end of the corridor, alive. He looked exhausted, his face was pale, and he was still wearing the missing brown suit. For a moment he simply stared at them. Then he lowered his head. "I suppose there's no point pretending now." "No," said Miss Marple gently, "there isn't." Arthur admitted everything. He hadn't meant for George to die, but fear had led to panic, and panic had led to lies. One lie became another. Soon he had created an entire story around a dead man. Inspector Harris placed a hand on his shoulder. "You'll have to come with me." Arthur nodded quietly. As Harris led him away, Miss Marple remained beside the study door. She looked at the empty leather chair and then at the rain-soaked garden beyond the window. "It's a curious thing," she said. "A man may die once, but a lie can make him die twice." Harris looked back at her. "And that was your clue?" "No, Inspector. The clue was the watch." Outside, the clouds finally began to break. A pale shaft of sunlight fell across the garden, touching the muddy footprints that had started the whole mystery. Miss Marple picked up her knitting bag. "Come along, I think I've earned my tea." And so the mystery of the man who died twice came to an end. George Bellamy had died only once. It was Arthur who had tried to make the village believe otherwise. If you enjoyed this mystery, subscribe to Haunting Vales for more Miss Marple mysteries, strange deaths, hidden secrets, and classic British village murders. There are more mysteries waiting in St. Mary Mead.